Welcome, Madam Ambassador. Great to have you with us.
It's a pleasure.
We have this report now. We have the Chinese version. We have some tweets out of President Trump. We haven't seen the text. But from what we've heard so far, it appears that we won't go forward with the new tariffs December 15. We'll reduce to 7.5% the tariffs that were put on September 1, and maybe some more phase down of tariffs going forward. From your point of view, does that make sense to try to hold the Chinese to their bargain and make sure that they do whatever they say they're going to do?
I can't argue with having some kind of leverage. My whole approach toward the Chinese would have been quite different. I would have worked with my allies. But I think that reducing the tariffs, which is really hurting our businesses and our farmers and our workers, is going in the right direction. It is something that we have really suffered from if you look at the statistics.
At the same time, we just heard from the president in the Oval Office. He was meeting with the Paraguayan president. He addressed trade, and he said, we're going to have at least $50 billion a year in Chinese purchases of agricultural products from the United States. Does that, to some extent, vindicate the president's approach? That sounds like a pretty good concession to the United States.
Well, I haven't read the agreement. It would be extraordinary to have a $50 billion commitment up front on, but you could get there if you go beyond agriculture and have equipment, manufacturing, and so forth. It could elicit some complaints from our allies who say, you know, that's breaching your national treatment and non-discrimination commitments that you complain about. But let's see. I don't want to complain about the agreement until I have had a chance to read it.
Yeah, well, that certainly is fair. But address one thing I suspect you do know about. The Chinese, when they're addressing this in their news conference, said, okay, we're going to increase our agricultural purchases, no question, subject to WTO provisions and subject also to the marketplace. Explain how that might limit, perhaps, what the Chinese could buy from us.
Well, they're going to have to make a decision. They have been, historically, our largest purchaser of soybeans. So if they go back to their top purchases, that will be a good thing. I think we are super competitive. But let's see how it works out. I think that to the extent that we are trying to drive China to adopt market principles, to abide by national treatment and non-discrimination, we need to fashion our partial agreement to be compliant also.
We're speaking with former U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Carla Hills. And Ambassador Hills, you mentioned earlier the need to have allies in. Thus far, we've done this bilaterally. But this is the so-called phase one. There's a phase two. There maybe there's a phase three. As we go forward to what may be more difficult issues, intellectual property issues, issues of subsidies from the government to industry, is it all the more important in that situation to have the allies?
Well, I think that, you know, you stand in front of China with Europe, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and really a total of more than 60% of global GDP, and say, these are the things we need to have fixed. Give us a blueprint of how you're going to address them. You know you committed to do these things in 2001, and I think we would have far more leverage with far less pain than by relying on unilateral tariffs.
If you were back in your old position and you were advising the President of the United States today, what would you tell him is the realistic expectations? Let's just pick one in particular, subsidies. China has a very differently structured economy than the United States or the West, for that matter. This is sort of essential to a state-run economy. What's realistic to get them to concede? They're not going to throw away their state-run economy, presumably.
Well, they are trying to go more toward the market. And we do business with other countries that have state-owned enterprises. In fact, we do. CalPERS in California is a state-owned enterprise. Singapore has a number of very large state-owned enterprises. The difference is there's no discrimination. Germany has a number, and over the years it has, if it gives subsidies to a specific sector that the state-owned enterprise is involved in, they do not discriminate against giving them to others.
So the markets have been reacting up and maybe down a little bit to this news. As you say, quite correctly, we haven't seen the language yet. We need to see the language. But just preliminarily, how should the markets be reacting? Is this good news for the U.S. industry, for U.S. economy?
To the extent that we pull back on our tariffs, it is good news. To the extent that we're moving forward, even if it's a small step, toward eliminating the trade war, it's going in the right direction. Let's hope that we can take many steps, get to the end where we can work with China on the issues that we share and that will require the energies of the two largest economies.
Okay, thank you so very much. Former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills will be staying with us now as we turn from U.S.-China trade issues to the USMCA, that replacement for NAFTA. Live from New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Them.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year?
I want a new phone, one with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
From ESPN and the award-winning producers of The Sterling Affairs comes the latest season of 30 for 30 podcasts. 4 brand new stories of espionage.
He wanted this team to be the Barcelona of women's basketball.
Resilience.
I started to scream. I tried to get away.
Corruption.
It's the culture of win at all costs.
And rebirth.
How will we ever rebuild it?
30 for 30 Podcasts, Season 6. Listen in favorite 30 for 30 podcasts on TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
Want TuneIn to remind you when the big NFL game is about to get underway? Be sure notifications are allowed on your phone and search NFL on the TuneIn app. Find the game you want to hear under events and tap Notify Me. We'll let you know exactly when it's time to listen in for kickoff.
Cutting for the net, scores! On the goal line, Marshawn scores!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
You can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The war of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut it.
The sideline, the man leads for 3.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now, hear it live on TuneIn.
Pump fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on the
Search
right.
NBA today to start listening.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Whether you call yourself a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or something else, the road to 2020 is on TuneIn.
What a night! And a complete earthquake. This was
Follow every step of the Democratic primaries while hearing the latest headlines from the White House with live 24-hour news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News Talk, and more.
We're closing in on the first results in the battle for the White House.
Experience the election through the sources you trust with the nonstop news channels on TuneIn.
Hostage by politics? This is a win for the American worker.
That was ranking member of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Congressman Michael McCall of Texas, talking to Balance of Power just yesterday. Former United States Trade Representative Carla Hills is still with us. So, Madam Ambassador, is this big a victory, the new revised USMCA for the American worker, as Representative McCall suggested?
I think it is a step forward. There are things in it that I would not have preferred to have in it, but we have a very strong relationship with our northern and our southern neighbors. He said 12 million jobs. I've seen calculations up to 14 million jobs of our interregional employment that comes from our trade with Canada and Mexico. And so getting over the trade war, upgrading the North American Free Trade Agreement and moving forward is, in my view, a plus.
A step forward, a plus, but I want to be careful here when we talk about 12, 14 million jobs. Is that incremental over NAFTA because USMCA is so much better, or is that the alternative maybe losing NAFTA?
That's the alternative to losing NAFTA. You know, if you look back at what NAFTA accomplished, it created the most competitive region in the world. And we not only make things together, we really work on strategic things together. And we have high employment because of our integrated supply chains. We have lots of tourists and benefits that come from that. And we forget that Canada and Mexico, we sell a third of our global trade to those two alone. It's an important trade partnership.
Yeah, it's really important to remember exactly that. It took the better part of a year to get this through Congress. It isn't through Congress yet, but at least to an agreement that looks like it will pass through Congress in the new year. Were the changes made at the behest of the Democrats that significant? I mean, for example, take the labor issues. Those were in the agreement. The question was enforcement and arbitration panel to enforce them. Was that a significant step forward in your judgment?
Well, the things we've imposed upon the auto industry, for example, we boosted up the rules of origin from 62.5% to 75%. That's going to be a little hard for small and medium-sized businesses that make parts for autos. And then we have said that the producers on autos must pay $16 an hour to their workers. To calculate that, you know, some of our entrepreneurs may just say, you know, that's just too much trouble. I'd rather just pay the 2.5% WTO tariff than to have to incur the costs. But this is what we have in the agreement, and I think that having the USMCA is far, far better than not having any agreement at all.
Ambassador Carla Hills, let's look forward a little bit, because as I understand, some of the provisions negotiated in USMCA were borrowed perhaps from the TPP, the deal that we stepped away from under President Trump with the Pacific. Are there things in the USMCA that could be a blueprint for future trade deals the United States does around the world?
Well, you put your finger on it. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was a template for upgrading and modernizing the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we put it into the USMCA. I think others will begin to think about, how do we do with that? What do we do with digital flows? How do we enforce the new technology that we have today that we didn't have 25 years ago? And so that's definitely a plus.
Okay, many thanks, Ambassador. Really good to have you with us. That's former U.S. Trade Representative Carly Hills. And we're going to have more with her coming up at 1 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Time in our second hour on radio. Coming up, the United States Senate is moving towards sanctions on both Russia and Turkey, whose two leaders appear to be moving closer to one another. We talk with experts in both countries. That's next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
When you want to deeply understand what's in a portfolio,
$2 billion, not what they were going for.
Or the next big thing.
He said that from day one, they're going to be profitable.
Or why the excitement is waning.
Who were really worried about recession.
You can find out fastest at Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Messer and Jason Kelly. Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
The average time a resume spends on an HR manager's desk is 7 seconds, and most of them are tossed aside. Now imagine if one of those resumes belonged to Yasmin, who was
living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative, and that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. I'm David Weston. Relations between Turkey and Russia have not always been easy through the years, but Presidents Putin and Erdogan seem to be putting much of that behind them, even as the United States takes actions against both, albeit for quite different reasons. Welcome now Russian expert Nina Khrushcheva. She is professor of international affairs at the New School here in New York, the author of the book In Putin's Footsteps. And from Washington, Amanda Sloat. She is Robert Bosch Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. So welcome to both of you. First of all, Professor Khrushcheva, let's start with you about exactly what Vladimir Putin appears to be doing with respect to President Erdogan. They seem to be getting quite close after Turkey shot down one of their MiGs.
Well, that was already 4 years ago, and we know that now politics moves very quickly and international affairs move very quickly. So they've become actually bosom friends right after that, because Erdogan originally was very kind of boastful about his shooting down the plane and saying that Turkey has its own policy in Syria, which is completely different from the Russians. And Putin cleverly immediately stopped trade, immediately stopped tourism, which of course Turkey relied on quite a bit in their economy. And 4 years from now, I think this year they already met about 5 times. They've been complimenting each other. They call each other bosom friends. I think Erdogan came out just recently and said that he and Putin are elder statesmen. But a lot of it also is selling of military equipment to Turkey, and Putin certainly is working hard to make that happen.
Yeah, we should go back to that, particularly the S-400. But Amanda, let's turn to you. It's pretty clear, at least to me, what is in it for President Putin. He can sort of peel off, as it were, Turkey from NATO and from a U.S. alliance there. What's in it for Turkey? Why does President Erdogan benefit from this?
So Turkey has had a number of frustrations with the United States, the European Union, and NATO over the last number of years. President Erdogan was very frustrated that the United States and the European Union were quite slow to respond to the coup attempt against him in July of 2016, whereas Russian President Putin reached out much more quickly. He's also been extremely frustrated with the United States for supporting a faction of Kurds in Syria in the fight against the Islamic State that are aligned with the PKK, a domestic domestic terrorist organization. It's also been clear that Russia has played a much more active role on the ground militarily in Syria. And so given Erdogan's own objectives in Syria, it's been in his interest to align himself more closely with the Russians than with the Americans. That said, I don't think Erdogan is wanting to shift entirely towards the Russians, but there is an element of trying to work it with both sides.
Professor Shirova, you mentioned military sales. Let's talk about the S-400s, that missile system that now apparently they're testing in Turkey, which has really gone crosswise of President Trump in the United States, particularly the Senate up on the Hill. How important is that? How big a factor is that in the military sales going on? Or is it a lot more than just the S-400s?
Well, it is important just because, of course, Russia wants to show off its very important weapons, but also Erdogan does need Putin in a sense that they both now essentially control Syria because they are in charge of peacemaking. They're in charge of where Assad goes or doesn't go and whatnot. And this is something that both important both for Putin and Erdogan, not only with military equipment and military sales and military buying equipment, but also their role in the region. Because Erdogan with S-400s, he now has something that gives him leverage in the region. And I think in this sense, the United States probably didn't play their cards very well because they had options with the Patriots, but they didn't do as much as Erdogan wanted. And of course, there's always a seller, there's always a buyer, and that's how Putin and Erdogan new friendship really has blossomed.
Yeah. We're talking with Nina Khrushcheva of the New School and also Amanda Sloat of Brookings down in Washington. And Amanda, let's come back to you for a moment. As Nina Khrushcheva says, Mr. Erdogan, Mr. Putin seem to now control, pretty much run Syria. They haven't always agreed on things like Mr. Assad. They've sometimes been at daggers drawn.
That's the interesting thing when you look at their relationship. They're actually on opposite sides of the Syrian conflict. The Russians have come in and supported the Assad regime, essentially leading them to military victory within the country, whereas Erdogan's objective from the beginning has been to see Assad leave. So they were at odds on that. And they've also had different perspectives on supporting this faction of Syrian Kurds that I mentioned earlier. While the United States worked with them in Syria, Russia has also worked with them, and yet Turkey has not had the same pushback against Russia that it has against the United States. But certainly given Trump's decision to largely pull out U.S. troops, Russia's very active presence on the ground, and Turkey's desire to go after the Kurds that it sees as threatening, Erdogan has seen it as much more useful to ally himself with Putin in Syria.
Professor Khrushcheva, whatever one thinks of Vladimir Putin, one has to respect him as a tactician. He sees opportunities, he goes for them.
Absolutely.
Maybe from his training in judo. Exactly. Absolutely. Right. He learned it from there. But did he see an opportunity, do you believe, when President Trump came out with America First? America First around the world. He says it's America First. If it's America First, it makes it more difficult to keep allies.
Well, it is, but also I think it has been, President Trump didn't invent it because there's all these countries that have been going on and saying our national identity is more important. If we look even within European Union, we look at Hungary, Viktor Orban does the same thing. So President Erdogan was doing Turkey first before Trump was doing America first. So in some ways, it is very convenient narrative on Trump's part, but also I think what's important to understand that America really has difficulty in having more than two colors, black and white, so it's either with us or against us. And Erdogan and Putin are really playing chess in this. So something, you give some, you take some. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but we are tactically have relationship with each other. And unfortunately, unless the United States starts catching up on tactics, it's going to be in disadvantage.
Well, and Amanda Sloat, catching up on tactics doesn't sound consistent with imposing new sanctions against Turkey, Russia as well, but sanctions against Turkey in particular, if we want to develop closer relationship. At the same time, do we have any choice but to do something, particularly, for example, the S-400, which, as I understand, has really interfered with our use of the F-35 in the region?
Policymaking in Washington is very complicated right now across a number of issues, but particularly on Turkey. You have the administration, including the State Department and the Pentagon, that have been trying to preserve good relations with Turkey while still recognizing that there need to be consequences for problematic behavior. Congress over the last couple of years has gotten incredibly frustrated with Turkey, and you've really seen that rise over its decision to imprison Pastor Andrew Brunson last year, its purchase of the Russian S-400s, and then most recently with with its incursion into Syria. Yet Turkey has been shielded from American sanctions by President Trump, given his very personal relationship with Erdogan, and so has not imposed these CAATSA sanctions that Turkey should face for having purchased Russian military equipment, and has not gone forward on a number of sanctions. And so I think you're going to see increasing congressional pressure, as you did with some of the measures that were passed this week, to send a signal to both Erdogan as well as Trump.
Policy making in Washington fairly complicated. I think that's a fair statement, understatement maybe. Many thanks to Nina Khrushcheva of the New School and Amanda Sloat of Brookings. Great to have you both with us. Coming up, Balance of Power continues on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we'll have more with former U.S. Trade Representative Carly Hills, plus former Southern District of New York Prosecutor Jessica Roth on impeachment. That's coming up on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits Look at Luxury. Porsche may offer the highest performance cars money can buy, but its electric Taycan is decidedly average in driving, barely eking out 200 miles, according to its EPA rating. By comparison, Tesla's Model S sedan starts at 287 miles, and its best-selling Model 3 at 220 miles range. And both cost far less than the Taycan's $150,000 price tag. In other car news, GM prepares big SUV counteroffensive with a larger Chevy Tahoe. The redesigned Chevy Tahoe is almost 18 feet long. It offers bigger seats, larger video screens, and a fat profit margin around 20%, says Bloomberg Intelligence. The average sticker price for a full-size SUV has climbed 27% since 2012 to a well-heeled $68,000. With the flooding of Venice, the Save Venice Foundation has a fundraiser. $500 will pay for a day for a conservator, while new flood barriers can be bought for $2,000. Mark Mills, Bloomberg Radio.
Financial leaders enjoy talking with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
What was it like having the giant darken the door every once in a while?
Experts appreciate it when what they have to say is understood.
Do you think that we might have seen a cyclical peak in the labour market?
It's the same reason we're recommending Bloomberg Surveillance to you.
Everything you thought would happen is happening.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is an update right now for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. U.S. equities, they've been all over the map, fluctuating between gains and losses. A swirl of trade news, whipsawing stocks and treasuries. But here's where we stand. S&P up 2 points now. That's a gain of about 1/10%. We've got the Dow up 13, higher by 1/10%, and NASDAQ up 26. That is a gain of just about 0.3%. 10-year is up 19/30. 30 seconds yield 1.82% this Friday. Gold up 0.3%, $14.74 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil rallying 1.4%, now with a 60 handle on WTI 60.01. Barrel of Brent 65.22, higher by 1.6%. So headlines, trade headlines, and tweets whipsawing financial markets as investors attempt to assess the contours of a partial deal reached between the United States and China. Investors also assessing today's vote, the overnight vote in the United Kingdom. As for UK business reaction to the election outcome, Sir Martin Sorrell is the chairman of S4 Capital. He was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television.
What I'm looking for, and I think what business is looking for, is a Britain that will be open for business like never before. I describe it as a Singapore on steroids. That will be a low regulation, low tax jurisdiction.
Indeed, Boris Johnson winning an emphatic election victory that redraws the political map of Britain and gives the Prime Minister the mandate he needs to pull the UK out of the European Union next month. Again, recapping the Dow, the S&P and NASDAQ all advancing on this Friday. A swirl of trade headlines. S&P up 2 points now, higher by 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
We have the strongest economy by far in the world.
We're going to grow our trade relationship.
I know what's broken. I know how to fix it.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
They've got the money they need to run a very competitive race.
We've got now a real crunch few days for Brexit.
We want certainty in the markets. We want certainty in our trading relationships.
The administration is trying to create a new divided world.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Boris Johnson scores a landslide in British elections. The House will vote on 2 impeachment articles against President Trump next week, and the U.S. and China move forward on trade. From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, welcome to the second hour of Balance of Power. On the heels of a trade victory with North America, President Trump appears poised to score another with China, something he talked about at the White House earlier today, saying he's such a good negotiator, he started to get the benefits even before the deal.
My deal with them was 2 months ago. We had it in pretty good form. I said, do me a favor, start buying agriculture. And they started. If you look, they're already buying. Even before the deal is signed, they're buying.
Former United States Trade Representative Carla Hills is still with us, so thank you for remaining with us, Madam Ambassador. Is this clearly a victory for the President?
I think that it's a move in the right direction. A trade war is very, very costly to the American people, workers, the businesses, and all of us. And so even though it doesn't have complete peace, we have taken one step forward.
President Trump says that he is redoing the way trade deals are done, not just doing trade deals, but redoing the way they're done. You have a vast amount of experience with international trade agreements. Will there be a Trump doctrine, as it were, in negotiating trade deals?
We may refer to the fact of unilateralism and using protections as a club with neighbors as the Trump method. I personally would prefer the open market approach, gathering those of like-minded ministers who can stand with you and enforce the rules that all of us have agreed to.
President Trump also says that he's getting something done that hasn't been done by various administrations, Republican and Democrat, through the years, which is really to make progress with China. Does he have a point there? And in fact, is he making progress that has not been made before?
I think he's focused on an issue that we have been less likely to focus on. But keep in mind, when China joined the WTO in 2001, it was nowhere near the size that it is today. And so when they did not give notice of subsidies or take action that we felt they should, it made very little difference. Today, it's the second largest economy, and it does make a huge difference when it doesn't follow the rules that have given us peace, stability, and prosperity for the past 25 years.
The huge and rapid growth of China is one thing that has clearly changed international trade for all time, it would appear. But I wonder if there's another aspect. I mean, going back to after World War II and the GATT rounds that we had, it was largely, I think, about trade in goods and commodities, things like that. The whole world's changed now to a digital world, and as we look at this trade deal, apparently it's been done between the U.S. and China, the phase one, it feels a little bit more like it's like 20th century trade rather than 21st century trade, which is going to be about artificial intelligence and intellectual property and things like that. What do we do going forward with trade in this digital world?
We ought to focus on the issues that you mentioned in step 2. I don't want to tear up step 1, but I would say that you're absolutely right. Technology has evolved enormously fast since we entered into the WTO and developed rules governing intellectual property, services, and the like. And that was 25 years ago. It needs to be updated. You didn't have a cell phone 25 years ago, much less many of the other technological advances. And it's going to go more rapidly in the future, so we need to have rules.
Do we have an advantage or a disadvantage in those negotiations over the new digital world?
I think that working with like-minded ministers, we all benefit from knowing what the rules of the road are. The law of the jungle serves no one. It reduces the opportunities to have prosperity. Uncertainty is a poison. So I think that we could develop the rules that we need for the 21st century economy.
Ambassador Hills, you've mentioned more than once the need to act with allies, with others, multilateral fashion. It brings to mind the WTO, which was the replacement, the successor to GATT. The President of the United States and the administration has really taken action with respect to GATT, including, as you know, refusing to confirm new members of the appellate panel, which now doesn't have a quorum. They say that, and there are Republicans and Democrats who say this because they say there needs to be fundamental reform of WTO. Are they right?
I think we do need to upgrade the WTO. I wouldn't throw it out. I wouldn't tear it up. I would try to deal with the issues that have created conflict. And so we need, the WTO has really 3 functions. Negotiations. We haven't negotiated anything really since the Doha round collapsed. Monitoring. We're supposed to monitor abidance by the rules, and more than half, including, by the way, the United States, have failed to negotiate subsidies. So we're not monitoring and enforcing that appropriately. And then dispute settlement, and that definitely needs to be upgraded. We need to have rules that we all agree to, law, if you will, governing our trade, and then an enforcement mechanism and abide by it.
Well, that's interesting. You raised the question about the rules because Senator Chuck Grassley has written, as you know, a piece with Juan Wyden, so a Democrat and a Republican, saying when it comes to the appellate panel, there are at least a couple of problems. One is they go outside the 4 corners of the record, and they'll go and make rules that aren't even being argued by the parties. And number 2, they take way too long. Are those fair criticisms?
Yes, to a certain extent, I think they are. The fact is that if the members have agreed to rules that they sat down and negotiated with. If we don't have a rule and we don't have that law that's governing our activity, then we don't want the appellate body to assume what the rule would be. So, but that's our fault. That's not the appellate body's fault. We ought to sit down and develop the rules that should govern our trade.
You also mentioned the possibility of WTO addressing through negotiation issues of subsidy, something that's very much on President Trump's mind when it comes to China. He talks about it regularly. Others do too, by the way. U.S. business, but also European business talks about it. Is it realistic to negotiate something on subsidies, or do we have to resort to things like the old-fashioned countervailing duty actions?
What the WTO requires is if you give a subsidy, you have to give notice. And since the basic norm is national treatment and non-discrimination, I want to know if you are giving a subsidy, and then if you are, whether it's to be to autos or pharmaceuticals, then my companies should be entitled to the same benefits that your companies are getting. And that's what we need to address.
Has China, though, ever complied with what it agreed to in the WTO? Because there are some who say there were parts of that they committed to they never complied with.
Well, as I say, on the failure of the WTO to monitor appropriately, there are all sorts of rules that parties, not only China, have failed to comply with. And I think we need to beef up the enforcement. You know, it's like the traffic laws. We say you can't go more than 35 miles an hour down this street. But everybody knows it doesn't matter. Nobody's looking. I'll just go 60 miles. And that's become more and more prevalent.
Finally, on the China Accord that they appear to have in Phase 1, is this the easiest part? Is Phase 2 and maybe a Phase 3 going to be much harder and perhaps take even longer?
I think complicated issues remain to be solved, but I'm very pleased that we took the first step. And if we can reduce uncertainty for our entrepreneurs, that will increase our prosperity. You know, these tariffs haven't been very helpful. They've been harmful. And for every job that we've gotten for the steel industry, we've lost 16 in steel users. And so it goes.
And so they appear to be addressing that. Okay, many thanks now to Carla Hills. She's CEO of Hills & Company and former trade representative. Next, we're going to talk about impeachment with Cardozo law professor Jessica Roth. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
In a perfect world, you'd be listening at exactly the same moment the most important things are said.
Negotiations over a trade deal are advancing.
Instead, we designed the perfect show.
They discussed risks and the transition to renewable energy.
June Grasso and Ed Baxter.
The conversation continues with a focus on trade.
Bloomberg Best, weekday evenings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Sweet strawberry icing. You're in Goodwill, and just past that vintage denim jacket you spot miniature donut earrings. You lean in. Ah, that's the scent of shopping success. Because at Goodwill, every item you buy funds local job training and more. So bring home those donut earrings and bring home so much good to your community. Goodwill. Bring good home. Brought to you by Goodwill and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year? I want a new phone, one with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or Vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchase by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. Listen now to ESPN Daily on TuneIn.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit tunein.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie.
With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds, or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Cutting for the net. Scores! On the goal line, Marshawn scores!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
You can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
The swagger of a perfect dunk. The rush of a three made from all the way downtown. The adrenaline surge of great defense. Can you feel the goosebumps yet? There's nothing like live NBA and nothing like listening live on TuneIn.
Giannis down the lane to the rim, throwing right corner three. Another one.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season so you can be there when it matters most. Never miss the action as it happens. Hear the ball you love. Hear it live on TuneIn. Search NBA today to start listening.
Lines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. U.S. stocks being whipsawed today on all the trade headlines. Keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio for the latest on these fast-moving markets. Right now, little changed. Higher on the S&P, up by 1 point, a gain there of just about 0.1%. Dow Industrials, little changed, up by 3 points at 28,134. S&P, though, could see another record today. NASDAQ advancing 22, up by 0.3%. Again, the 10-year up 1830 seconds at yield 1.82%. A swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets as investors attempt to assess the contours of a partial deal reached between the U.S. and China. Gold up 0.5%, 14.76 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.1%, 59.86 a barrel. So again, recapping here, S&P up a point, little change at 31.70. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much to Charlie Pellet. From the Interactive Broker Studio, this is Balance of Power. Well, it isn't just trade, it isn't just the British election that's swirling around the news today, it's also impeachment. The House Judiciary Committee debated well into the night last night and then reconvened this morning, voting out 2 articles of impeachment for the full House to take up next week. Welcome now Jessica Roth, Cardozo law professor. Professor Roth served earlier as a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. So, Professor, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
We know that this is ultimately a political act, but there's law that underpins it. So let's take a look at it as a legal matter for a moment. Let's take a look at these 2 articles as an indictment, as it were. Was the House smart in limiting to just 2 articles? There was talk about going beyond that into things like obstruction of justice from the Mueller report.
I do think that was probably the right strategic choice for them politically, because they, just like prosecutors, you want to keep your story and your charges as clear as possible, and keep them to the things as to which you have the best evidence. Here, of course, there's the political dynamic as well. But the fact that they drew them as narrowly as they did and that they chose only 2, I don't think is going to limit their ability to present other relevant evidence that's not necessarily directly on point for those two articles. And in particular, I'm thinking about the language in Article 2 that talks about Trump's conduct being consistent with his behavior in terms of obstructing other investigations. And that's going to allow them to sort of fill in the larger context and background for his actions with respect to the Ukraine investigation, with things coming from the Mueller investigation, for example.
One of the charges, I guess number one, is he corruptly solicited investigations from Ukraine that would aid his re-election campaign. We got a bit of a sense of President Trump's defense, I think, to that today in the Oval Office when he said, look, they're misreading the transcript. He didn't say, President Trump did not say, do me a favor. He said, do us a favor. I was doing that on behalf of the American people, not for my election. Okay, put yourself back as a prosecutor. You're in the Southern District. You're in this, and you're arguing this case in front of a jury. Is that a good argument?
So it may be the only argument he has, but it's not a compelling argument. Here's why. Because there are normal channels that you go through when you actually want another country to pursue a legitimate criminal investigation, and it goes through the Department of Justice and a treaty we have with other countries, and so you would go through those normal channels. So that's number one. He didn't go through the usual channels. And number two, all the evidence points to him wanting Ukraine to announce the investigations rather than really caring about whether they did the investigations. And the announcement is what would most help him politically. If he really cared about the substance of the investigations and them being done well, it actually impairs that to publicly announce the investigations. So I don't find that argument persuasive, although, as I said, I do think it's his best argument if I were to think about it from the defense perspective.
Okay, well, let's try a second argument that it seemed to be floating today in the Oval Office when he talked about the fact that, look, the reason I didn't give the aid right away was not because I was trying to get them to start this investigation. I did it because I was angry that other Europeans, much closer, Germany particularly, they're not giving aid. Why should we be giving aid when they're giving aid to Ukraine for their defense? How about that as an argument that whatever happened, whatever he wanted in terms of investigation, it was not tied to withholding the aid?
The problem is that the evidence doesn't support that as being the reason for withholding the aid. And the reporting has been that there were justifications being sought after the fact. If that were the real reason, you would think that the evidentiary record would support it. And it also would be problematic, I think, for the president to hold it up when the aid had already been authorized by Congress. So it's an odd argument for the president to assert. It seems to be made up sort of ex post. And as I said, the evidence supports that just simply wasn't the rationale.
It appears to be likely, or maybe even almost certain now, that the full House next week will vote out the articles. It will go over to the Senate. There'll be a trial. We don't know yet what form that trial will take. And there are reports that there's a bit of a conflict between the Senate Majority Leader, he is Mitch McConnell, who says, let's just have an up and down vote. We don't need to take witnesses. On the other hand, President Trump thinks that, maybe it might make sense to go long, get his story out there. But this is what he said today about that subject.
We did nothing wrong. So I'll do long or short. I've heard Mitch. I've heard Lindsey. I think they are very much in agreement on some concept. I'll do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't mind a long process because I'd like to see the whistleblower who's a fraud.
So, again, as a defense lawyer, put yourself on the defense side right now. Would you be counseling your client, if you think you've got the votes, let's get this thing behind us, because you never know what might turn up if you drag it out?
That's true that you don't know what's going to turn out, and we have this really unknown animal in terms of what will the rules be in the Senate, and you're going to have the Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, presiding, but he won't have the final say on evidentiary rulings or rulings of procedure. That will be decided by 51 votes in the Senate. So even though the Republicans control those votes ultimately, you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. So there is an argument for keeping it short. On the other hand, to the extent that the American people are tuning in and watching, one has to wonder about the perceived legitimacy of the proceedings if, in effect, there is no trial in the Senate. It doesn't seem that many people are tuning into the substance, and so maybe it doesn't move the needle at all, but at least I'd be thinking about that.
Well, and that leads to the last question, actually. Is this likely to be essentially a show trial? In this sense, when you argued to a jury in the Southern District, you had a chance of persuading them. At this point, it doesn't look like you're persuaded. How do you make your arguments knowing that half the people aren't listening to you?
It's incredibly difficult to imagine what the position is going to be of these House managers presenting the evidence, given what you just said. The senators are going to be sworn to an oath to try the case impartially, and yet it would seem that they all do have their minds made up. And so it may be that this is really about creating a record for history more than actually persuading their peers.
Okay, thank you so much, law professor Jessica Roth from Cardozo Law School. Coming up here, all roads lead to the Supreme Court today as it decides what to do about those cases seeking Trump's tax records. We're going to talk with Bloomberg Law's Kimberly Robinson. That will be coming up on Balance of Power next on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. A swirl of conflicting trade headlines and presidential tweets whipsawed financial markets. The Dow is in positive territory, barely up 2 points to 28,134. The Nasdaq's up 24 and the S&P 500's up 2 points. But it remains somewhat unclear under the agreement announced today whether China agreed to buy enough American farm products or if the U.S. is planning to roll back some existing tariffs. New tariffs set for Sunday will not go into effect. In November, the jobless rate hit a 50-year low. Wage gains picked up the pace and Wall Street set several records. So economists believed we'd be freer with our money as the holiday shopping season got underway. But what we got instead was slower than expected spending growth. The Commerce Department reports retail sales climbed just 0.2%. They were held back by falling sales at clothing stores and restaurants, although online sales were strong. Martin DeCaro, Bloomberg Radio.
When you went car shopping, you meant business. You aced vehicle history searches and test drives. You out-salesman to the salesman. Now you've got your wheels. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll have the info you need to get more for your future. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to speeding past financial challenges, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscribe.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel with top news stories from today.
Chinese officials held a news conference this morning saying it's agreed to a U.S. trade deal phase 1, and tariffs on goods coming into the U.S. will be phased out. There's still more details to come, although China indicates the next step is signing the deal. The Dow is up 135 points, almost 0.5%. The Nasdaq up 50 points, 0.5%. The S&P is up 11 points. There were some new details this morning on this reported deal, and it appeared to get skinnier and skinnier. It may just be an agreement for agriculture purchases.
I think what's remarkable is that we have announced that we are willing to take down tariffs, not only stop the increase on the 15th, but actually take down some of the tariffs that we've already put on.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from CNBC on TuneIn.
Along the goal line, Martin scores and takes it home.
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot, they score!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
To LeBron, slam dunk!
The NBA is on TuneIn Premium. Each week, TuneIn picks an NBA game you just can't miss. The Miami Heat are taking their talents to Texas to take on the second-year phenom, Luka Doncic, and the Dallas Mavericks.
Pulls back, trying to make it 11-2.
This Saturday, the Miami Heat are at the Dallas Mavericks. Tip-off is at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Search NBA on TuneIn to follow your favorite NBA team today.
In the stock market and in life, everything can change from 1 minute to the next. Be the first to hear the latest money news and market trends with CNBC on TuneIn. Wherever your day takes you, listen to CNBC's full slate of programming, including shows like Fast Money, Squawk Box, and Mad Money with Jim Cramer. And when the next big business story breaks, CNBC lets you know with live updates and commentary. At the office, at home, or on the go. Search CNBC on TuneIn to listen.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump faces a range of demands for access to his financial records. We're joined by my colleague June Grasso to talk about the Supreme Court's conference today to decide how to handle the multiple cases. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, David Weston. Busy Friday, lots going on. Of course, a great reason to keep it locked on to Bloomberg Radio. Right now, we have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing, but a swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets. 1 minute we're up, next minute we're down, but right now we've got the S&P up by 2 points, up just about 0.1%, 3170. The Dow up 4, a gain there of less than 0.1%, 28,137. NASDAQ up 0.3%, up 22 points right now at 87.40. The 10-year up 20-30 seconds, yield 1.82%. There is evidence in today's government data that the holiday shopping season got off to a slow start. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Commerce Department's figures on retail sales missed Wall Street forecasts in November, rising just 0.2%. Sales in the closely watched control group barely budged as clothing stores and restaurants posted declines. One bright spot, online sales. They posted the biggest gain since August. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Invesco is shutting 16% of its American exchange-traded funds, and Super Shuttle, the shared van service that has carried passengers to and from airports across America and in Latin America, Canada, Europe, and Asia, is going out of business, according to the LA Times. Gold up 0.5%, 14.77 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, now at $59.91 a barrel. Recapping, stocks higher, little changed. S&P up 2 points, up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That, David Weston, is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much to Charlie Pellet. Congress wants President Trump's financial records to consider whether he violated the emoluments clause, or clauses, actually, because there are two of them. A New York prosecutor wants them as part of an investigation into hush money paid to women claiming they'd had sex with Mr. Trump. And lower courts have agreed that the president can't block access to the records in either case. Today, the Supreme Court met to decide how to handle the multiple requests. We welcome now my colleague June Grasso and Kimberly Robinson, Bloomberg Law Supreme Court reporter. So, Kimberly, before we get to the Supreme Court and what they did or did not do today, let's lay out these two cases because they're quite different.
They are a little bit different. So as you mentioned, there's a request from the House of Representatives who say that they're looking into changing some of the ethics laws. And to do so, they want to take a look at the president's financial records. On the other side, we have prosecutors in New York who are looking into these hush money payments in relation to criminal prosecution. So they're a little bit different, but they're trying to get at the same information.
They're different, but one thing I think that's similar is the lower courts, one in Washington and one in New York, didn't hesitate much on these claims. They were pretty adamant that no, you can get access to the records.
Well, that's right. And that's because the Supreme Court has weighed in similar situations involving previous presidents, most notably with President Nixon, requiring him to turn over the Watergate tapes that were so damning to his administration. So that's kind of the law that the lower courts are working on.
So, Kimberly, the justices had a conference today, and they were scheduled to take a look at the case involving the Manhattan DA's subpoena. What happened?
Well, we still don't know, and it may be that they're still in conference to decide what to do. So I'm at the Supreme Court here waiting to see if they'll take up the case or not. If they've decided to take up the case, they may tell us today, or they may wait on Monday. But for now, it's just a waiting game to see what the Supreme Court will do, or if it won't act at all and will allow the subpoenas to go into effect.
Now, most of the people that I've spoken to say that this is the kind of case that involves a question involving the president and his financial records, and it's the kind of case that the Supreme Court almost has to take. What have you been hearing?
We've seen over the last couple of years that the justices really do take requests from the president very seriously. But here's a case where I mentioned where the law is kind of stacked up against the president. He's really asking for some sweeping immunity from criminal investigations and from investigations from the House. Listeners might remember that in the lower courts below, the president's personal attorney said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and the state of New York couldn't look into it. So this is a very serious request from the president, but the justices do take his request very seriously.
And is it unusual for the justices to not decide 1 week and just push the case off to another conference?
It is usual for them to do that. We've seen them do that with a lot of really high-profile issues. One thing here, though, is the timing. The Supreme Court is getting ready to go on a very long break and won't come back until mid-January, which won't leave a lot of time for the justices to hear the case before they wrap up their term in June. So time is pretty much of the essence in this matter.
One of the questions I always ask Kimberly in situations like that is, where is the Solicitor General? Because the Supreme Court, as you know, really wants to have the views of the SG on something like this. Is the Solicitor General in it, and what is he saying?
Well, he's not formally a party to the case, but he has weighed in front of the court briefs, and he's come down on the side of President Trump. Now, he hasn't advocated for such sweeping immunity as the president's personal attorneys, but said that cases like this can distract the president from doing the country's business and should really be a high bar for prosecutors and the House to get these kinds of documents.
Kimberly, as June says, I think most people think the Supreme Court is going to have little choice but to take some version of these cases. At the same time, they've got one from the Second Circuit, the one involving the New York prosecutor, that's decided by the Second Circuit. Isn't the other one from a district court?
Right. So not all of the lower courts have been able to weigh in. These are working on an expedited fashion through the Supreme Court. And so it's really hazardous to tell what the Supreme Court is going to do. That always is dangerous business. But,
right. Well, we're guessing, which is always fun with the Supreme Court. But it's also possible the Supreme Court says, in a case this important, I want to get as many lower court opinions as I can before I look at it. So let me hold on to the Second Circuit, get some other Court of Appeals opinions, because I may learn something from that.
That's true. The justices often do let issues, they call it percolate in the lower circuits, just to get kind of a reasoned analysis from as many jurists as they can. So that certainly is an option for them here. Again, we're just going to have to wait and see.
But they do have, I don't think any others are pending, they do have the 2 Second Circuit opinions and the D.C. Circuit opinion, right?
They do have a lot of opinions here, and as you mentioned, they've all gone the same way. If the Supreme Court were to step in here, it'd be more of an issue of wanting to take on this significant request on behalf of the president rather than letting the lower courts have the final say here.
You know, I'm going to ask you something outside the subpoenas for a moment, and that's about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because we know she had some health scares, and then she was in the hospital a few weeks ago. So tell us about her appearance and how she's doing.
Well, you're right. She has had some health scares over the last year. She was on the bench for almost 25 years without missing a hearing, and then missed her first of those earlier this year, and then again last month. But she's back on the bench, and she seems strong as ever. In the last argument this week, she was asking a lot of questions, often the first out of the box, and we saw she had a pretty substantial dissent in the Supreme Court's first opinion of the term.
And she's making a lot of public appearances, isn't she?
She is. She's one of the justices who go out in the public the most, and she's got a full lineup while the Supreme Court's on recess. She's going to be making appearances, accepting awards, and she'll be out and about.
She's a celebrity. She's
I know.
Notorious RBG. Why not?
I had to laugh when she had J-Lo and Alex Rodriguez in her chambers, and J-Lo said it was about marital advice.
And the thing you have to know about Ruth Bader Ginsburg is, because I knew her years and years and years ago, she's always been very shy. Her husband, Marty, was the showboat, and here at the end of her life, more or less, she's a celebrity.
She's drinking it
in. It's great.
Boy.
It's wonderful to watch. I really enjoy it, actually. She's a remarkable figure. But by the way, we should say she affected the law in the United States in a profound way that very few people, men or women, have done or will do again, frankly.
And she's just known now. She's so well known. A few years ago, people didn't know what the Supreme Court justice, who it was, and now they know RBG, even the kids, and she's an icon now.
She, by the way, was also a great Supreme Court advocate. I got to see her argue a couple cases. She was really good at it. Okay. Many thanks now to my colleague, June Grasso, and to Bloomberg Law's Kimberly Robinson. Coming up here, British voters handed Boris Johnson and his Conservative Party a big win yesterday. We talked with Eurasia Group's Mujtaba Rahman about what it means for the United Kingdom and for Europe more broadly. That's next on Balance of Power. We're on Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year?
I want a new phone, one with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or Vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
You never know where life will take you, which is why the new BMW 3 Series Touring is perfect if you're all packed up for, or escaping to. It has extensive storage and an automatic tailgate, handy if your hands are full. And it even has an optional intelligent voice assistant to help you at every turn. The new BMW 3 Series Touring. Book your 24-hour test drive today. Test drive subject to status and availability. Participating retailers only.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel with top news stories from today.
Chinese officials held a news conference this morning saying it's agreed to a U.S. trade deal phase 1, and tariffs on goods coming into the U.S. will be phased out. There's still more details to come, although China indicates the next step is signing the deal. The Dow is up 135 points, almost 0.5%. The Nasdaq up 50 points, 0.5%. The S&P is up 11 points. There were some new details this morning on this reported deal, and it appeared to get skinnier and skinnier. It may just be an agreement for agriculture purchases.
I think what's remarkable is that we have announced that we are willing to take down tariffs, not only stop the increase on the 15th, but actually take down some of the tariffs that we've already put on.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from CNBC on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The roar of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut
the
it.
Sideline, the Van Fleet for 3.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now. Hear it live on TuneIn.
Fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on
Search
the right.
NBA today to start listening.
From ESPN and the award-winning producers of The Sterling Affairs comes the latest season of 30 for 30 podcasts. 4 brand new stories of espionage.
He wanted this team to be the Barcelona of women's basketball.
Resilience.
I started to scream. I tried to get away.
Corruption.
It's the culture of win at all costs.
And rebirth.
How will we ever rebuild it?
30 for 30 podcasts, season 6. Listen in favorite 30 for 30 podcasts on TuneIn.
In the stock market and in life, everything can change from 1 minute to the next. Be the first to hear the latest money news and market trends with CNBC on TuneIn. Wherever your day takes you, listen to CNBC's full slate of programming, including shows like Fast Money, Squawk Box, and Mad Money with Jim Cramer. And when the next big business story breaks, CNBC lets you know with live updates and commentary. At the office, at home, or on the go. Search CNBC on TuneIn to listen.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got the Dow, the S&P lower, little change right now. NASDAQ is advancing. U.S. equities all over the map on this Friday here. A swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets as investors attempt to assess the contours of a partial deal reached between the United States and China. Stocks swung between gains and losses. Treasuries rose as neither side delivered enough details to calm investors who sent shares to records on reports yesterday fresh tariffs due Sunday have been averted. President Trump confirmed as much this morning, but it remains unclear whether China has agreed to enough agricultural purchases or if the U.S. has planned to roll back some existing tariffs. Here's where we stand. We've got the S&P 500 index now lower by less than half a point, little changed, holding close to a record 3168. Dow Jones Industrial Average down down 2 points at 28,129. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 17. For NASDAQ, that is a gain right now of just about 0.2%. 10-year up 19.30 seconds. The yield 1.82%. Gold up 0.5%, 14.77 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.1%, 59.85 a barrel. Brent up 1.3%, 65.02. Some of the other business stories that we're following on this Friday: the government's monthly report on retail sales missed Wall Street estimates at the start of the holiday shopping season. The official data show sales increased a mere 0.2% in November, restrained by weakness at clothing retailers and restaurants, but online sales did advance. Also, the government out with its latest and final inflation report of the week. Unlike the others, it suggests inflation remains generally tame. The import price index rose 0.2% in November, in line with Wall Street forecasts. Invesco is shutting 16% of its U.S. exchange-traded funds. The Atlanta-based company, which manages about $220 billion in its ETFs, will close 42 ETFs that oversee a total of $1.1 billion in assets. The liquidations, which will take place in February, include 14 of the 20 ETFs that Invesco acquired when it bought Oppenheimer funds earlier this year. And personal banking information for tens of thousands of Facebook workers in the U.S. was compromised last month when a thief stole several corporate hard drives from an employee's car. The hard drives, which were unencrypted, included payroll data like employee names, bank account numbers, and the last 4 digits of employees' social security numbers. This all according to an email that Facebook sent off to employees this morning. Facebook shares, by the way, down 0.9%. So again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, a volatile Friday, all turning higher right now. S&P up by 0.5 point, 31.68. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much to Charlie Pellet. It's been quite a week, I think it's fair to say. It's Friday, and it's a good time to look back. Been quite a week for President Donald Trump. We started out the week with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, coming to camera and saying that after a lot of negotiation and over a year, they'd come up with a compromise approach to the USMCA, that successor agreement to NAFTA, that would be moving forward abruptly. At the same time, Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, said, yeah, well, not so fast. We're going to wait until after we get done with that little thing called impeachment over on the Senate side. And then overnight last night and then today, it appears that there is some sort of agreement on phase 1, at least, of a trade deal between the United States and China. We don't know exactly what's involved in that agreement at this point. We do know that the tariffs that were due to go into effect on Sunday, the 15th of December, which were going to hit a lot of consumer goods and particularly some technical goods, some tech goods, they will not go forward as originally planned. At the same time, they're going to roll back the tariffs that were imposed on September 1st to a level of 7.5%. And according to the Chinese, who went out to a news conference earlier today, according to the Chinese, the tariffs are going to be rolled back in phases. President Trump, in the meantime, appeared at the Oval Office and said, you know what, we got a really great deal. We're going to have at least $50 billion in agricultural products alone that we're going to be getting bought by the Chinese from the United States government. We're joined now by Bloomberg Chief Content Officer Marty Schenker, coming to us from Washington. So, Marty, I thought here on a Friday at the end of the week, we talk about winners and losers. It's hard to portray President Trump as much of a loser this week.
No, and I think he actually got a deal, a phase 1 deal that, the devil's in the details, but, the market reaction and anticipation of the deal is something I'm sure he is very much welcoming.
And he wanted that USMCA deal. He appears he got that too, although he may have to wait a month or so.
Yeah, because the House is probably going to pass it next week, but the Senate, Mitch McConnell and the Senate said they won't get to it until 2020. But the point is it is going to get passed. And even though it's just incrementally different from the NAFTA deal it replaced, it's still a victory, and Donald Trump can claim it.
It does strike me, and I bet it strikes you as well, that it's pretty extraordinary. We're having a discussion at the end of the week about how well it appears President Trump did. And at the same time, it became absolutely clear today he will be the 4th president in U.S. history who will be impeached.
That's right. I think there's no doubt that the Democrats, there may be a few defections among congressmen who think of themselves as vulnerable, who will defect from the Democratic Party. But Nancy Pelosi knows she has the votes to pass the 2 impeachment counts, and it'll then go to the Senate to die.
And exactly, Mitch McConnell knows he has the votes, and it's not going to go anywhere over in the Senate side. And the president in the Oval Office today, I felt a little sorry for the president of Paraguay, who was sitting there as the president went on and on about impeachment. And he claimed, look, if you look at my poll numbers, I'm doing better than ever. This is helping me. It's hurting the Democrats, particularly because independents appear to be getting increasingly wobbly on this impeachment thing.
You know, it's funny. It's sort of, to me, it's a little reminiscent of what happened in the UK with Brexit, that it was so long that many people who actually didn't support Brexit finally just said, enough, let's just get it over with. And, you know, that I think is the danger of impeachment. And you got to give Donald Trump and his surrogates credit. They have beaten this drum since day one, and I do think that the American public is getting a little tired of it.
Yeah, there's also a question, at least in my mind, of whether this is sort of you want to go too often to the impeachment well. I mean, who would have thought that? I've now seen 3 impeachments in my lifetime. Who would have thought of that? At some point, doesn't it sort of debase the currency?
There has been some narrative out there today about the danger of impeachment becoming a more normal process. You know, if a Democrat does win the White House in November, will Republicans demand impeachment as a form of checks? It is, in fact, a very extreme measure, and you could risk it becoming normalized.
And it's right down party lines. That vote today of the 2 articles of impeachment, right down party lines. Nobody's moving yet. They may, as you suggest, but nobody yet. Nobody yet.
And it is something that, you know, history will judge whether or not this was something that needed doing. There are all kinds of theories. I have some about how this could have all been averted, but it's the reality, and we're going to have to live through it.
That's well said. Okay, Marty, thank you so much. That's Marty Schenker. He's the Chief Content Officer for Bloomberg. And now it is time on this Friday afternoon to find out what's coming up on Bloomberg Business Week, which is what we all look forward to every week. Jason.
We do.
Jason
we do
Kelly.
look forward to it. David Weston, great to be with you. Also, always love hearing the dulcet tones of Marty Schenker's voice, even outside the studio. We're going to talk a little bit about trade, obviously.
Oh, really? Oh, really? Is that in the news today?
Yeah, a little bit in the news. We're even going to talk a little bit about EBITDA, so don't get too excited about that. But we're also, later on in the show, we're going to talk a little venture capital, talk about Wall Street bonuses, and for those shopping for the man in your life, Roan. It's sort of the Lululemon for men. I don't know if you've heard of this
one
company.
I don't know. You had Lululemon yesterday. I don't know Roan.
Yeah, you should know these guys. Based up in Connecticut, they make a nice product. So the founder, Nate Checketts, is going to be along. Maybe gives you some tips. Yeah, we're hard to buy for, I think.
I think I'm very hard to buy for. Sometime I'll tell you the story about when Tom Keene tried to teach me what EBITDA was on the air.
Oh.
Yeah. So there you have it. So that's Jason Kelly with Bloomberg Business Week. Look forward to. In the meantime, that does it for this week for Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope we'll see you again next week.
At Asda, packs of beer are just £12 each, including 24 bottles of Budweiser, 18 cans of Stella, or 12 bottles of Birra Moretti. Looks like you're hosting this year. Asda, let's make Christmas extra special. Selected stores online, subject to availability. Budweiser 300ml, Stella 440ml, Moretti 330ml. Excludes Scotland. Drink aware.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year?
I want a new phone, one with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or Vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
This is the Tune In Newsreel with top news stories from today.
China is reporting that phase 1 of a trade agreement has been reached. The agreement covers agriculture, intellectual property protection, and other areas. President Trump tweeted the penalty tariff set for Sunday will not be charged because we made the deal. The U.S. will begin negotiations on phase 2 immediately. China's vice finance minister says phase 2 depends on implementation of the phase 1 agreement. There's a disappointing reading on retail sales heading into the holiday shopping period. The Commerce Department says retail sales rose just 0.2% in November. Ford is recalling more than 500,000 Super Duty pickup trucks in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico from the 2017 to 19 model years because of a possible carpet fire risk. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Ginny Cosola, invested in you.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from Fox News on TuneIn.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Hey, TuneIn listeners, Steve Kornacki here from NBC News. I want to tell you about a podcast I'm hosting called Article 2, Inside Impeachment. It's dedicated to bringing you the latest developments on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I talk to NBC News reporters who are closest to the story to break down what's new, what matters, and what it means for the 2020 election. Search and favorite Article 2, Inside Impeachment on TuneIn.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
I get that impression from Powell. I get the feeling he's a little bit more independent than what people might think he is.
Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine.
You want to go in the auto industry, I'm going to buy X and I'm going to short Y.
Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
Something happens in my brain when companies compare themselves to Amazon.
Yeah.
Like a whole bunch of brain cells die.
What is it, that techno music? What is it that you're supposed to do when you're there?
Yeah. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
And live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, this is Bloomberg Business Week, a Friday edition. What a week. News all over the place, and it didn't stop today. Trade, dominating the headlines. Shonali Bosick sitting in for Carol Masser. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
All right, we're going to get into a lot of different things and bring you up to date before you go into the weekend. And speaking of getting up to date, let's get a check on the business world from Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Jason Kelly. Happy Friday. What a week. What a Friday. What a Friday morning. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now, but U.S. equities, they have been all over the map. A swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets as investors attempt to assess the contours of that partial trade deal reached between the U.S. and China. We'll have a lot more on the topic coming up right here on Bloomberg Business Week. Here's where we stand now. Little changed on the S&P, up less than 0.1%, higher by 2 points. Looking at a record, 3170. The Dow up 17, up 0.1%. NASDAQ up 21. That's a gain of 0.3%. 10 years up 18.30 seconds with the yield of 1.82%. Gold up 0.5%, 14.76 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 59.93. Did have a 60 handle on it earlier in the session. Recapping, little change. S&P up 2, a gain of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Shonali Bosick here on a Friday afternoon, and we're going to get to some of our colleagues in a minute, Shonali, to talk about the Business Week agenda. One of them gave me a little bit of a hint about what we may be talking about, which is the UK election. That seemed to be the thing that everybody was going to be talking about today, and then here comes the President of the United States, all about trade. But the UK, it's still a big deal.
It's still a big deal. And, you know, even though we had a lot of messy news coming out, even just over the last 24 hours, we're ending on a high note.
Right, exactly. So we're going to talk about the UK, also get a peek into the world of venture capital. I know that's something you're very interested in and is in as well. And we're going to wrap up the show. Yesterday we talked about Lululemon. Today we're going to talk about sort of an upstart in that athleisure world. Roan, the CEO, is going to be along, so that should be interesting as well. Let's set the Business Week agenda now. Michael McKee, rock star, celebrity appearance here with us, our international economics and policy correspondent for Bloomberg, and Sarah Ponzak, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg, a rock star in her own right. She's a little more frequent guest on this show, so it's not every day that we get Michael McKee. So Michael McKee, last saw you down in Washington. You've been back home here the last couple days. What's on your agenda? What's the one thing investors need to be thinking about today?
I think what you have to do is look at both the UK election and the trade deals as something that, in theory, could lower the uncertainty premium that people are paying and pave the way for higher equities. The problem is we don't have enough details yet on either. And obviously we don't know a lot about the China deal, but what I mean about the UK is, okay, they're going to leave the European Union, but the real issue now is what kind of trade deal are they going to have, both with the EU and the US, and until you know that, you're not going to know how quite investable they are. So there's still an uncertainty premium out there, but maybe some of the froth has been blown off.
Well, you did see the VIX actually come down quite a bit, so you saw the uncertainty wane. What I wonder is just what you're saying. Even though some of the risks cleared up now, we head into more risks through the end of the year and early next year. We have the U.S. elections to worry about next year. So how do investors pair off the short term and the long term?
Can we just call a halt to all the news between now and January 2nd so we can catch our breath?
I'm still worried about Super Tuesday even.
It's kind of crazy. You know what I think you'll find is that the election won't dominate the markets as much as everything else that has. It generally doesn't really start to impact anybody till you get close to the fall and we see who the nominees are and what the odds are of any particular issue that they would bring to the table that could affect Wall Street. There's a lot of talk about Elizabeth Warren this or Bernie Sanders that. Right. I mean, we don't know who's going to be the nominee or whether those things are even possible. So you're not going to move your money around based on that at the moment. But going into the year, now that they say we're going to do this trade deal phase 2 immediately, that's going to leave that overhang. Because we'll probably go through the same thing where there are tweets and there are threats and there are this and there are that.
And we think there's a deal and maybe not, and maybe more tariffs or maybe not. All right, Sarah Ponzak, come on in here. What are you watching today? What are people talking about back on your desk?
It really is the trifecta. As Mike was saying, for one, you have the UK election now over, the Conservative Party winning by a large majority, so likely you don't get a no-deal Brexit, which is a risk taken off the table. At the same time, when it comes to U.S.-China trade, you have that phase 1 trade deal. When it comes to the rollback of the tariffs, it does seem a lot of investors were potentially hoping for a further rollback of the tariffs that were in place. We now know that we are getting that September tranche cut in half, that tariff rate cut in half to 7.5%, hoping for a bit more, but still very happy that December 15th is not going to go into place. But then when you think about the third factor that happened this year, and that goes back to the Federal Reserve, we now have a Fed that has made it very, very clear that they are on hold with maybe even more of a bias to cut. So you think about where we came into the week, still some of these risks lingering, where we're coming out of these weeks, 3 of potentially the biggest risks overhanging the market now moved to the side. So yes, some of that froth, maybe some of that worry is removed, but absolutely what Mike said regarding those phase 2 tariffs, it does seem like some people are now just hanging in for another 2020 that might feel like 2019 with trade headlines every single day.
So, Shonali, you're talking to people on Wall Street all day long, every day. What are they talking about today?
Well, today, right? Today, nothing. I think everyone would like to go home, but the Fed is actually really interesting to me because just 6 months ago, I think about 6 months ago, right, we had Brian Moynihan sit at the Economic Club of New York and say he didn't think that the Fed was going to cut. And now we're talking about a bias towards cutting once again. And just in the second week of January, we have all the big banks starting to report earnings. All of them are very sensitive to these very low interest rates. And so I'm really curious what Mike's view is on the Fed discussion this week. On one hand, it was a lot of non-news, right? But on the other hand, walking into next year, I don't think any of my sources really know how they want to play the markets, frankly.
Well, short term, we got to sort of dispose of this whole repo issue.
Yeah.
Fed increased the size of the auctions coming up so that they think they can get past the turn, but there's still a lot of people who are worried about a spike. And of course, Monday we've got quarterly tax payments due, and that was one of the triggers for the last spike. So we'll see what happens. Once we get past that, then it's the economy. The trade deal isn't going to really do anything to affect the trajectory of the economy, and so it really becomes about whether the consumer keeps spending. And kind of lost in all the news today, dismal retail sales.
Yeah.
And we had this happen in the fourth quarter last year where people just didn't spend as much as thought. And if that continues, then the Fed's got to keep an eye on things.
Can we talk about that for just 1 second?
Sure.
Because the repo issue is actually something that is a really big issue and people are talking about. And the impact of the repo market on the hedge fund community, I think, is underexplored and something we'll be looking at in the next couple of weeks.
Agree?
So I wouldn't know so much from the hedge fund standpoint, but shameless plug. We had Mike Schumacher. He is the head of interest rate strategy at Wells Fargo Securities on the podcast this week on the What Goes Up podcast. And repo was a big issue of discussion. He addressed it plentiful. And what he basically said was he thinks that if it does become an issue, he thinks the Fed is on its game and the Fed will step up and really do whatever it takes. In the words of Mario Draghi and ECB, the Fed will do whatever it takes to make sure that the repo does not start spreading through the rest of the market and truly affecting people in a poor way.
And we're going to put that question to our own Alex Harris later on in the show, top of next hour. In the meantime, our thanks to Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent for Bloomberg, Sarah Ponzak, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg. Hope you both have a fantastic weekend. Well, coming up, we're going to get into the contours of the trade deal, at least what we know so far. Sarah McGregor is going to be along with us, along with Clayton Allen from Height Capital Markets. In the meantime, let's get over to Bob Moon. He's got some world and national headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, thank you. Soon after the House Judiciary Committee approved the 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump, accusing him of abusing his power and obstructing Congress, Trump returned to 3 words he's used repeatedly virtually throughout his time in office.
It's a witch hunt, it's a sham, it's a hoax.
And he had 3 more words for Democrats on Capitol Hill, labeling them bad, sick, and corrupt, and accusing them of deliberately mischaracterizing his now infamous phone call to his Ukrainian counterpart.
I think it's a horrible thing to be using the tool of impeachment, which is supposed to be used in an emergency, and it would seem many, many, many years apart, to be using this for a perfect phone call where the president of that country said there was no pressure whatsoever, didn't even know what we were talking about.
Trump's conduct, though, has been far from perfect in the view of House Judiciary Committee member Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas.
He betrayed the nation, he moved us toward corrupt elections, and he abused his power.
She told reporters the committee carried out its duty today without any glee, but somberly and soberly. The Democratic majority House is expected to approve the charges against Trump next week. President Trump said today the U.S. has canceled plans to impose new tariffs on $160 billion worth of Chinese imports Sunday. The move is part of a modest interim agreement that de-escalates the 17-month trade war between the world's 2 biggest economies. New Zealand military specialists wearing protective gear have recovered 6 bodies from a small volcanic island. 16 people died in an eruption early this week. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
In the real world, there are no rabbits in hats, crystal balls, or cards that turn into money. Instead, you get business information from top-tier analysts and experts.
What should expectations be for this latest round of negotiations?
That's actually better, isn't it?
They're both trying to say they have the upper hand.
Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Lisa Abramowitz. Weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
3, 2, 1. Oh no. Which button am I?
When every second counts, you can't wing it.
Guys, a little help up here?
In a home fire, you may have less than 2 minutes to get out. So make a family home fire escape plan. Then practice home fire drills at least twice a year so everyone knows what to do when they hear. Prepare your family at ready.gov/fire drill. Brought to you by FEMA, the Ad Council, and Make Safe Happen.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
I'm a 40-year-old man that walked in there to get his high school diploma. It was very hard for me, but Miss Araceli, she gave me direction.
At age 47, Marco finished his high school diploma.
50% of getting your high school diploma is walking through those doors. The other 50% is doing the work.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
The S in Audi S-Line stands for many things like sporty, stylish,
streamlined, and now seductively priced. Like the new Audi A4 S-Line, which you can now have from £359 per month, £2,154 initial rental. Test drive one at your local Audi centre, but you'll have to be swift. The offer ends soon. Search Audi S-Line. Audi, Vorsprung durch Technik. With 48-month contract hire, 10,000 miles per annum, 18s and over, subject to status, damage charges may apply, no ownership. Ordered by 31st of December 2019 from participating centres. Audi Financial Services, visit audi.co.uk.
Ah, Christmas. A time for celebrating, unwrapping and unwinding. Capture every moment with an epic iPhone 6S with a 12-megapixel camera. Now only $12.99 a month from Tesco Mobile, saving you £72. It's just one of the ways we're celebrating 100 years of great value. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Saving £2 per month over 36 months was £14.99. 36-month credit and rolling monthly usage agreements required. Subject to status. Terms apply. See tescomobile.com/terms.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel with top news stories from today.
China is reporting that phase one of a trade agreement has been reached. The agreement covers agriculture, intellectual property protection, and other areas. President Trump tweeted the penalty tariff set for Sunday will not be charged because we made the deal. The U.S. will begin negotiations on phase two immediately. China's vice finance minister says phase two depends on implementation of the phase one agreement. There's a disappointing reading on retail sales heading into the holiday shopping period. The Commerce Department says retail sales rose just 0.2% in November. Ford is recalling more than 500,000 Super Duty pickup trucks in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico from the 2017 to 19 model years because of a possible carpet fire risk. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Ginny Cosola, invested in you.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from Fox News on TuneIn.
Hey, tune in listeners. Steve Kornacki here from NBC News. I want to tell you about a podcast I'm hosting called Article 2, Inside Impeachment. It's dedicated to bringing you the latest developments on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I talk to NBC News reporters who are closest to the story to break down what's new, what matters, and what it means for the 2020 election. Search and favorite Article 2, Inside Impeachment on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
In the stock market and in life, everything can change from 1 minute to the next. Be the first to hear the latest money news and market trends with CNBC on TuneIn. Wherever your day takes you, listen to CNBC's full slate of programming, including shows like Fast Money, Squawk Box, and Mad Money with Jim Cramer. And when the next big business story breaks, CNBC lets you know with live updates and commentary. At the office, at home, or on the go. Search CNBC on TuneIn to listen.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing, little change, but higher nonetheless this Friday with the S&P up 1 point to 3169, a gain of less than 0.1%. A swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets today. S&P, as I mentioned, higher. The Dow up 5, also little change to 28,137. NASDAQ up another 21 points to 8738, up by 0.2%. 10 years up 19 seconds, yield 1.82%. Gold up 0.5%, 14.77 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 59.95 a barrel. Recapping, S&P up by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks a lot. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week here on Friday the 13th. Jason Kelly and Sonali Basak here in New York City. Well, let's talk a little bit of trade because as we've been mentioning, and as you heard Charlie mention, and just about everyone else on Bloomberg networks today, it's been the dominant story. Sarah McGregor, U.S. Senior Trade Editor for Bloomberg. She joins us on the phone from Los Angeles. And Clayton Allen, Vice President of Special Situations at Height Capital Markets, on the phone in Washington, D.C. Sarah, I want to start with you. So just lay it out for us. What did we hear? What do we know at this point after all the back and forth and the tweets and the comments and the denials and the speculation? What do we know?
Of what we know, what did the U.S. win? What did China concede? The U.S. has won a commitment from China to buy more U.S. farming goods. Those, of course, sort of hit rock bottom during the trade war. Farmers were hit. They're politically important to Trump, especially going into this next election. So $40 to $50 billion a year of agriculture purchases have been promised by China from U.S. farmers. And we're hearing from the U.S. that is an increase over 2017 levels before this trade war started. From China, they've actually come out quite well. They've, met their number one demand, which is no tariffs on Sunday on these $160 billion of consumer goods that were supposed to hit, and a slight rollback in the tariff rate for some of the tariffs, existing ones in place. So both sides have something to sell to their constituents.
Clayton, thanks for joining us. Tell us how you think that this is going to impact markets. How do people play their investments given the Phase 1 deal?
Sure. So I think the first thing to note is that people's expectations heading into this week were all pretty uniform. I think the delay of December 15th tariffs, or cancellation December 15th tariffs, however you want to phrase that, was a really consensus view. The unknown factor was any impact on tariffs beyond that. The president indicated today that we'd be reducing some other tariffs, specifically saying that other tariffs would be at 7.5%. I think reading through that, you can take that to mean that some of the tariffs imposed in September at 15% would be reduced, and that's really what drove a lot of the positive movement yesterday. I think from today on, though, there's a lot of skepticism and uncertainty. Those ag numbers, the $40 to $50 billion number, seems actually a little bit unreasonable or unattainable when you look at where ag exports were prior to the trade war and what the high point has been. And I think that's leading a lot of investors to wonder, are we actually going to be able to follow through on a lot of the promises that have been made?
And so, Sarah, come on back in here. Clayton raises some really good points about the fine points of this and whether this is actually, to use a very technical term, doable. What do you make of that, especially given the political and maybe less economic, but more market importance of this deal getting done?
Absolutely, and I think what Clayton brings up is just the enforceability of the agreement. And the Trump administration has been very critical of previous administrations because, they said any commitment they ever received from China in any sort of trade form, China would just say one thing and then not fulfill that promise or not follow up as quickly as they said they would do. And the Trump administration was going to be different. And so I think the risk maybe with this agreement, there is an enforcement mechanism. We're hearing that from the U.S. side. We don't have a lot of details on it yet. But you can believe, given that it's Donald Trump and his love of tariffs, that the threat of tariffs will remain out there. And if China doesn't live up to its commitments, that idea, at least, that Trump could reimpose tariffs, he could escalate the situation again, will be at the forefront of everyone's minds. And the agriculture purchases could be a clear example if it's an unattainable number. That said, going into the 2020 elections, this, we're hearing from analysts, this is a deal that could potentially at least hold up through the elections, considering it probably won't be implemented until the end of January, and so it gives Trump something to campaign on in the meantime.
You've both outlined a fair bit of uncertainty here, a lot of skepticism. The markets are relatively calm given today's news. Clayton, can you tell us a little bit about when you think that skepticism is going to start sinking into markets and what this means into next week and through the end of the year?
Sure. So I think that everyone is kind of treating this as a little bit of an unknown, kind of a Schrodinger's cat sort of situation until we actually get the deal signed at some point in January. We don't have a specific date for that. And I think what we've seen today is probably going to be indicative of how markets and the U.S. and Chinese side treat this deal until we get to that point. There's not been a tremendous amount of kind of the chest beating on the U.S. side or confirmation, really, from the Chinese beyond the press conference this morning, and I think both sides are going to try and let things sit until we have details publicly available. The point that was raised about an enforcement mechanism, I think, is really key here, and that's where a lot of this uncertainty is going to come back in. The details of this agreement probably will include a rollback of some of the tariffs that have previously been imposed, and that's an important distinction to make because under the federal law that allowed these tariffs to be put into place, rolling the amount down is something that can be done almost at will. It's like a volume knob. Eliminating them completely is a more forceful and kind of final action. So if we're just rolling tariffs back, then investors will immediately flash to, you can turn them back up just as easily as you turn them down.
Right. Really interesting point. Sarah, before we let you guys go, about 40 seconds here, there are other trade potential deals out there, maybe tensions, you might even say, or deals that haven't quite gotten there, USMCA, and now we're talking UK. What's on the horizon near term?
Absolutely. Well, Trump said today he's immediately going to get started with the Phase 2 deal with China, which is supposed to tackle those really tough economic reforms that it's hard to imagine China is going to agree to, things like eliminating state subsidies. So, what that means, we'll have to see. What will they immediately start it, and how big of a deal will it be compared to the Phase 1? Like you said, the UK will be pretty hungry, I think, for a deal with the U.S. They've been trying to set off those talks in earnest, so I think that might accelerate forward. And USMCA, we're expecting a vote in the House potentially next week. So I think, it's been a big trade week here, and we'll see whether that can get through. It looks like it might, but you just never know.
You'd never know. That is true, and that's why we always turn to you, Sarah McGregor, U.S. Senior Trade Editor for Bloomberg, joining us on the phone from Los Angeles. And Clayton Allen, grateful to you as well, Vice President of Special Situations for Hite Capital Markets, joining us on the phone from D.C. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Stocks are narrowly higher as the parameters of the U.S.-China trade agreement come into focus. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 16, the S&P 500 up 2 points, the Nasdaq Composite up 22. GM plans to invest $1.5 billion in a suburban St. Louis plant that makes trucks and vans. The automaker plans to keep 4,000 jobs at the factory. Nearly 4,300 people currently work there. Facebook says personal banking data on about 29,000 of its employees was compromised when several corporate hard drives were stolen last month from an employee's car. Information on the unencrypted drives included salaries and bonuses. With less than 2 weeks left till Christmas, Christmas tree supplies are tight again this year in some locations. The number of U.S. Christmas tree farms fell 3% between 2012 and 2017, the latest year available, according to the government. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night, and somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here, testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use, and the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel with top news stories from today.
China is reporting that phase one of a trade agreement has been reached. The agreement covers agriculture, intellectual property protection, and other areas. President Trump tweeted the penalty tariff set for Sunday will not be charged because we made the deal. The U.S. will begin negotiations on phase two immediately. China's vice finance minister says phase two depends on implementation of the phase one agreement. There's a disappointing reading on retail sales heading into the holiday shopping period. The Commerce Department says retail sales rose just 0.2% in November. Ford is recalling more than 500,000 Super Duty pickup trucks in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico from the 2017 to 19 model years because of a possible carpet fire risk. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Ginny Cosola, invested in you.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from Fox News on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds, or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today. Want TuneIn to remind you when the big NFL game is about to get underway? Be sure notifications are allowed on your phone and search NFL on the TuneIn app. Find the game you want to hear under events and tap Notify Me. We'll let you know exactly when it's time to listen in for kickoff.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Some days life can get in the way of catching up on the news that moves your world. TuneIn is here to help. With live 24/7 coverage from CNN wherever you go on the TuneIn app, you can always find a slice of your schedule, however long, to check in on the biggest stories of the day.
Hell hath no fury. The president's counselor went on a rampage on a taped phone call with Washington Examiner reporter.
Search CNN on TuneIn to get the live news when it matters most.
Hey, TuneIn listeners, Steve Kornacki here from NBC News. I want to tell you about a podcast I'm hosting called Article 2, Inside Impeachment. It's dedicated to bringing you the latest developments on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I talk to NBC News reporters who are closest to the story to break down what's new, what matters, and what it means for the 2020 election. Search and favorite Article 2, Inside Impeachment on TuneIn.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
And coming up next, we're going to get into Brexit. Oh, sweet Brexit. We've been talking about you for so long, and now we have a little bit more of a roadmap, certainly more of a roadmap politically for the UK. We're going to see what it means for markets with one of the best in the business. But first, let's get to another of the best in the business, Charlie Pellet. He's got an update. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Very busy day. We have got stocks swinging between gains and losses right now. The S&P, as I speak, swinging onto the minus side at 3168. Could see a record close, though. Any move higher will be a record, not only for the S&P, but also for NASDAQ. NASDAQ up now by 17, a gain of 0.2%. We've got the Dow lower by 4, also little change. Bottom line, fluctuating and little change. So a swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets as investors attempt to assess the contours of that partial deal reached between the U.S. and China. As for the bigger picture, David Stubbs is head of international market strategy at JP Morgan Bank in London.
Of course, you have at its very nature a tense
this relationship as one hyperpower, declines arguably, and one rises very fast, and that's going to have a multifaceted range of conflicts across, frankly, the rest of our investing lives. Yeah. We hope that the tariffs are the ones that are going to stay contained for now, but there's going to always take many different avenues, this conflict.
The 10-year up 20-30 seconds, yield 1.82%, gold up 0.5%, 14.77 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%, $60 now and 7 cents. Invesco shutting 16% of its American exchange-traded funds. The Atlanta-based company, which manages about $220 billion in its ETFs, will be closing 42 ETFs that oversee a total of $1.1 billion in assets. Recapping, stocks mixed, S&P up now by 0.5 point. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on a Friday afternoon on Bloomberg Radio. All right, so everything's cleared up, apparently, Shonali Bosick, because UK people voted and, nothing to see here. Let's just move along. Maybe not so fast. John Authers, senior editor for Bloomberg Markets, also Bloomberg Opinion Columnist, is here. He has been following this very closely, to say the least. John, great to have you. So what happens next?
What happens next is Britain leaves the European Union at the end of next month. There's really, to all intents and purposes, no doubt about that one. After that, there's plenty of doubt. I have enjoyed my last year or so as a British political pundit. British political pundits have been greatly in demand among American markets type people for the last year or so. I suspect I'm going to have to get back to my day job of writing about markets quite a bit more. There is an awful lot more that does matter greatly if you're British, and about the trade relationship, which will have some market impacts. But in terms of the really big binary macro risks that Britain has been presenting for the last few years, those genuinely do recede quite significantly now.
There was a very interesting view I picked up on Wall Street this week down at UBS O'Connor. What they believed is the U.S. markets next year, especially with the uncertainty in the U.S. elections, that European equities would get more exciting. But you have some opinions here that seem to complicate that view.
Well, complicate it. I don't think it's a bad guess. That being said, it's an argument I've made quite a few times over the last few years. I think I have a chart in my latest newsletter that MSCI's index for the rest of the world, excluding the US, has underperformed the US by 60% now since the top of the market in 2007. That's pretty drastic. You really would think there'd be some reversion at some point. In terms of the EU, in particular, there really are signs that it should be reaching the bottom of what's a very nasty manufacturing slump. Germany is, to some extent, part of the whole imbroglio over US-China trade. It exports a lot. But that is important if the Brexit deal can be done relatively smoothly. That is another risk for the EU, which minimises. The other critical point, though, is that if there is less perceived risk around Brexit, around the EU and around China, there is less need for a safe haven, and the dollar has been functioning as a safe haven. So that more or less by default means that the US begins to underperform the rest of the world to some extent.
And John, I want to ask you, and I know this is of interest to both Shonali and myself, just the mechanics of how the British sort of financial industry, as it were, works now. I mean,
that's the big potential question.
Yeah.
Will keep mainstream Bloomberg clients in the US interested in what I have to say. Back on election night, on referendum night in June 2016, there were still plenty of people who thought that the City of London would maintain what's known as passporting rights, that you could have a bank that's physically in London but could behave as though it was, to all intents and purposes, as though it was in the EU. That very quickly became apparent wasn't going to happen. We are now at the point where the city is in the south, and in London, where lots of people didn't vote Conservative, and Boris Johnson owes his victory to a big swathe of people in the north of the country. The City of London is Britain's greatest export by more or less any sensible measure, and the euro the rest of the year, the EU has very little incentive to be nice to the City of London. We, the British, through the City of London, took a lot of business which might naturally have been expected to go to Frankfurt or Paris or Amsterdam or Dublin. So the chances are quite strong at this point, given that the politics points to a Johnson government protecting farmers, fisheries and the auto industry, all of which are outside the London and the southeast, but all of which are less valuable in aggregate to the UK than the city. The chances are quite high that London's competitive standing as a financial centre is going to get quite badly hurt by the deal that gets thrashed out, and that could have real big personal physical repercussions for a lot of Bloomberg clients.
Well, just to drill down on that point a little more, where do the jobs go? Do they go to Frankfurt? Do they go to Paris? How successful will those cities be in
Only
capturing...
about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I remember talking to people the first couple of weeks after the referendum, and lots of people were cock-a-hoop because they thought they were going to live in Paris on expat packages. The inside gossip is that there's a lot of banks have been buying up office space in Amsterdam. Has Schiphol Airport. Every person in Holland speaks English as well as anybody in America or the UK. Dublin also does well.
Yeah,
conceivably.
Interesting. Yeah, Frankfurt, I think, was everyone's big fear.
Yes,
exactly. All right,
let's not deny it.
That's right.
Big fear.
John Authors, always great to catch up with you, senior editor for Bloomberg Markets, and as he said, of late, a political pundit of sorts. We'll be looking forward to his musings in 2020. Well, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about EBITDA. Yep, you heard it right. We're taking you back to business school. First, let's get to Bob Moon. He's got your world and national headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, thank you. Today's 23-4 and 17 against partisan split on approving 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump reflects the sharply drawn divisions on Capitol Hill. Republican members of the House Judiciary Committee made clear their frustrations and their continued backing of Trump, as Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Capitol Hill.
Republicans made 3 efforts to pass amendments that would have reversed course on impeachment. After the final vote, they spoke out once again. Louis Gohmert.
I really hope and pray the Senate will not just dismiss it. America needs to hear from the witnesses.
Debbie Lasko.
This is really a travesty, and it's really tearing America apart.
Mike Johnson.
I think there's going to be a huge political price paid by the Democrats at the polls next year.
The Republicans will charge the impeachment was a sham, and if Joe Biden is nominated, that he and his son are crooks. On Capitol Hill, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump said today the impeachment effort seems to be very good for him politically. He also offered insight today into his Phase 1 trade deal between the U.S. and China, saying tariffs will largely remain, which he'll use as leverage for further negotiations. He also hailed the outcome of an early election in the UK that affirmed the leadership of Boris Johnson, who plans to wrap up Brexit next month.
He's a friend of mine. It's going to be a great thing for the United States also, because it means a lot of trade, tremendous amount of trade. They want to do business with us so badly. Under the European Union, it was very, very hard for them to do business with us.
Johnson is voicing confidence he can negotiate a new relationship with the EU by the end of 2020. Global News 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Are you? When it comes to music, I've heard it all. Pink Floyd, Sean Paul, Slipknot. But in the Witch Test Lab, hearing isn't enough. When we test headphones, we really listen. Not just to the music, but to the stuff that gets in the way. The traffic, the chatter, all that. Mind the gap. We simulate the loudest commute to find you the headphones that cancel out the noise. So you know we're only recommending the best.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel with top news stories from today.
China is reporting that phase 1 of a trade agreement has been reached. The agreement covers agriculture, intellectual property protection, and other areas. President Trump tweeted the penalty tariff set for Sunday will not be charged because we made the deal. The U.S. will begin negotiations on phase 2 immediately. China's vice finance minister says phase 2 depends on implementation of the phase 1 agreement. There's a disappointing reading on retail sales heading into the holiday shopping period. The Commerce Department says retail sales rose just 0.2% in November. Ford is recalling more than 500,000 Super Duty pickup trucks in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico from the 2017 to 19 model years because of a possible carpet fire risk. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Ginny Cosola, invested in you.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from Fox News on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Start hearing more of what you want. Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations, live commercial-free news, and every live NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL game. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Want TuneIn to remind you when the big NFL game is about to get underway? Be sure notifications are allowed on your phone and search NFL on the TuneIn app. Find the game you want to hear under events and tap Notify Me. We'll let you know exactly when it's time to listen in for kickoff.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The war of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut it.
To the sideline, the man bleeds for 3.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now. Hear it live on TuneIn.
Pump fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on the
Search
right
NBA today to start listening.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, they are lower, little change. NASDAQ holding on to a gains, trading at a record. Right now we have got the S&P 500 index fluctuating between gains and losses, down now by just about half a point. The Dow retreating by 7, also little change. NASDAQ up 15, a gain now of 0.2%. A swirl of trade headlines and tweets whipsawing financial markets today as investors attempt to assess the contours of a partial deal reached between the U.S. and China. Right now, the 10-year up 21/32, yield 1.81%. Gold up 0.5%, 14.77 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.4%, back above 60.02 a barrel. Brent 65.14, up 1.5%. Recapping stocks mixed. S&P now lower, little change, down by half a point. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio. All right, so Shanali, it is a term familiar to many on Wall Street, many of our listeners, people who work in companies, many investors, but what does it actually mean? EBITDA is what we're talking about. Davide Shiliutza is here with us, corporate finance reporter for Bloomberg, alongside Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. This is our Business Week explainer in this week's weekend show. Davide, great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks
All right.
for having me.
And we should point out, longtime listener, first-time guest. Always good to have you here in the studio. So tell us why you decided to take on EBITDA here.
So this is an issue that a lot of people, as you said, in the market and on Wall Street have been talking about for a long time, but we thought it was a good opportunity to take a step back and sort of look at it in the macro picture and like how big of a problem this could potentially be. And the issue really is not so much about using EBITDA as a metric, as a substitute for like earnings for companies to measure their performance, but it is about the adjustments that companies make to that metric, especially when they borrow money.
What kind of adjustments are we talking about?
We've seen many different kinds. And as we point out in the story, some companies take 10 words to define what their EBITDA is. Some companies take up to 3,000 words to do that.
That is a wide range. There's 10 on the short side, 3,000 on the upper end. How are they gaming this?
It's about the adjustments. It's about so you start with the EBITDA number that's taken from your, income statement and financials. And then it's what you back out of that figure. And you can add all sorts of adjustments. Usually they're related to cost savings that you expect to achieve in the future, synergies that you expect to achieve in the future if it's a business combination, and things like that.
There's an amazing stat in the story. And by doing this, they inflated their EBITDA, which is essentially supposed to just say how much they're making their profit.
And just to get the definition of EBITDA in there, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Now, keep going.
Yeah.
You just have to get token insert of definition.
Those are specific things that you just mentioned that should be removed, right? That have numbers. So by changing different things, they have inflated their profits by an average of 43%.
Yes, that was in the first quarter of this year.
And you're a credit reporter by nature, right? And so a lot of people on Wall Street, the reason they're worried about this is because it can worsen the next crisis.
It definitely creates a lot of uncertainty because there is no consistency, no standards. So when people and credit investors look at a company, they're like, well, what am I really looking at? Do I believe this number, or do I have to redo all the calculations myself before I make a credit decision?
And not everybody on Wall Street is an accountant.
Well, some firms are bigger than others and have more resources than others.
Right. Well, and one of the interesting things, and Shanali was alluding to this right when you came into the studio, she and I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about private equity. I mean, the junk bond world has been the rocket fuel for LBOs now for 30 years, right? So this plays into, and Joel and I have spent many hours talking about sort of private equity's outsized role in the economy. This plays into that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about leverage loans and junk bonds, which are the preferred source of financing for private equity deals. And so definitely that's a big driver behind this all.
There was WeWork this year, remember, that it was using community-adjusted EBITDA. Are these methods finally coming under scrutiny by regulators and investors? Obviously that was a big...
WeWork got a lot of heat for that. And they've actually discontinued using that particular metric. They use a different one, which is slightly different, a little bit more conservative in how they calculate it. But definitely when they came out with that, and it was at the time of their first junk bond issue last year, they definitely got a lot of attention.
Which gets to this thing that inspired this story in the first place, which was this conversation that we started to have, it seems like ages ago. We had a lot of Chinese food and talked about it over lunch, about bubbles. And things were feeling a little bubblicious over the summer. And that's where this kind of came from. And it's funny because, as we've also talked about recently on this show, the overall mood sort of changed, and the clouds opened up and everything got right. And yet, these numbers, 43% you threw out there, that's high, especially when you look at going back to 2015 is when we can compare this to highest of any quarter, right?
Yes, it's the highest of any quarter since 2015, which is when the firm we use for this data, Covenant Review, started collecting the data itself. It's come down a little bit since then, but I think we're still in the sort of on the higher side of that.
Hot, right? And if you go back even, let's go back a decade, right? 2010s, the term that was used a lot around stuff just like this was, quote unquote, liar loans. So put those two things together for us. What does that mean now?
I mean, it's really tricky to because you have to really take on a case-by-case basis and delve into what each company is doing. But the idea is
hence why there's 10 words or 3,000 words.
Exactly. The idea is that at the time you're taking a loan, you can sell a story into the future as opposed to a view into the past. And that's what really, I think, a lot of credit investors, especially if you think about how long this credit cycle has been, that's the issue that they have.
What I don't understand here is why is this not considered lying?
I mean, it's not a GAAP metric, so it's not a metric that companies are reporting to the SEC or that it is, in their audited financials.
You're essentially not breaking a rule because there is no rule.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like it's like a way for them to give people a view of what the company could look like.
Right.
If a lot of assumptions that they have play out as expected.
Yeah, because the cynical view of this, I remember sort of coming up as a cub reporter and a cynical editor saying EBITDA is earnings before all the things you have to pay for. And sort of this very sort of world-weary view that people are going to do this. And I remember when the private equity firm, speaking of private equity, went public back in 2007, they came up with this whole concept of economic net income, which was sort of a way for them to show profitability without having really profits.
Speaking of bubbles, and me and Davide do a lot of meetings together. If you walk into the banks these days, I think something that's interesting is that there are a lot of banks that are now saying they don't want to underwrite these loans with these fluffy metrics. So a lot of these banks are saying, you know what, I don't need to be the number one underwriter.